Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us by Zoom. How is everyone on this very warm day? Keeping cool?
Yeah, good. I've got the aircon in the office, so that's good.
Oh, thank God. I've got my Gold Air kind of tower fan right close to me, and it's keeping it to about 27, which is a bit more manageable.
Mm,
You probably hear a slight sort of buzzing in the background.
yeah, no, it's so hot. And I'm just thinking like going home, I do have an aircon, but like when I put it on, my power bill skyrockets. Like you
Yeah.
can just have it on for a day and it goes up like by $20. So I'm not gonna do
Just
that.
chomp, 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 right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like a few other people are joining us. Erin, hi there, and Vary as well. I can see that Claire's here, Menendez here as well. We'll just wait for the others to join us. Um, so funnily enough, today is actually my birthday, which is kind of why I prefer not to be outdoors as well, because I sort of feel like I'm going to keep sweating. Seems like Riley's having a problem with the link. I'll just let Riley know. Sometimes this happens. Um, yeah, and so obviously being my birthday, I'm thinking about when I was born, where I was born, how life has changed I'm not even prepared to say how many years. Um, yeah, my mum as well. Um, it's one of those days that, any day in the year you can celebrate. Obviously, right now, there's the Diwali festival that's happening. But when it comes to birthdays, some of us like to have big bashes and some of us like to have contemplative times. But for me, because my birthday always falls within the last stretch semester, it always feels like the agenda gets really full at this time. So I sort of have said to my mother over the years, why did you have to give birth to me during the worst time of the academic year? And she would always say, I didn't choose it. I was actually born premature, so I should have been born in November, but I decided to come early, if that's entertaining for you. Yeah, but the funny thing is my mum was also premature. She was born premature. She was born quite premature. And she was the eighth of eight children. And back in those days, they didn't have things like humidity cribs or whatever. And so they actually took her home in a shoebox. Yeah. And her mother fed her like broth to try to keep her strong. And this is part of family law. Yeah. Um, the local priest visited and said, this one will not survive. But my mum did survive, and my mum was very much a survivor. So I think it was enough for her to have had pretty much six kids with the same husband, and I was the fifth. So, it seems like there's this sort of intergenerational thing that in that branch of the family, there were always lots of brothers and sisters, and consequently lots of aunts and uncles. And for me, I grew up in a noisy household with all of us competing for attention and trying to outdo one another. And maybe that explains why I ended up being so driven in my life, because my mum used to drive me crazy sometimes. But she was very much she had these values around education and, striving for things. I think I spoke about that in class at some point. So let's see. Still waiting for some others to join us. I'm also reminded of where I grew up today because it's so warm. Yeah. Um, oh, thank you for your reflection, Erin. we all have different contexts, don't we? And yeah, I imagine it would be if you are someone that's, it sounds horrible to say only child, doesn't it? Like as if you're lonely. But perhaps that is part of the experience. You wonder what it would be like to have other siblings as well. Or maybe you find your kin in other ways, you know? I actually have four sisters and one little brother. My little brother and I didn't always get along, but we do better now. Seems like distance helps. But yeah, this time of the year, I'm usually just doing things with friends and chosen family, because I don't normally get the chance to go back to Perth. So, who else has been able to join us? Alex seems to be joining us now. Just making some mindless small talk at this point. Liam's here. Welcome. Yeah, so the heat of Perth is not as humid as here, but apparently this heat cycle originated in Western Australia in the northern area of the Pilbara. So I'm looking at that kind of ironically thinking, maybe that's a warm hug from, the state that I grew up in. Or maybe I should be embracing it, but yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? Hi, Liam. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, just trying to keep cool.
I'm from Jordan.
I think we're justified to have this choice by Zoom, even if you're in the classroom right now. And if you are in a classroom or an office, I do hope that you've got your air conditioning right up, because the Bureau of Meteorology has already issued a warning about being out and about. Would you believe it? That's how soft-hearted we are, that we need to have Bureau of Meteorology warnings about going out. Yeah. So if you have joined us, do turn on your cam. I'm just trying to see what's happened with Riley, because Riley was reporting having issues joining. But did anyone else have issues?
Um, I found that punching in the meeting number was a good way to do it. For some reason, I couldn't open my Zoom app, but doing it the manual way was fine.
I could try and suggest that to him, the meeting number. We could also try punching in the meeting number. Thanks for that, Tatiana. All right. So, like just as face-to-face, people tend to arrive slowly anyway, and they're coming from different directions, perhaps maybe having finished work or on their way. Some people will be joining us in person or from wherever they're from. So I'm on Gadigal land, which is not actually far from university, but I'm one of those soft-hearted people that, like if I head out right at the peak of today, I'm just going to be melting. So all of our sensitive souls here are being accommodated. Christina, welcome. So please, for this particular couple of hours, and it might not be 2 hours exactly, when we're interacting, it'd be great to turn on the cam if possible. Thank you. We'll see who else can join us. But okay, I've just said I'm joining from Gadigal country. So do you remember at the beginning of semester, we had this kind of exercise to work out, where we reside, the name of country, even country that we move across during any given day. Some of us join from a bit further away than Gadigal land. So is anyone able to, even in the chat, say where they're joining us from? Just as a preliminary. Make free use of the chat.
I mean, I'm on Gadigal land at the moment. I'm right in Martin Place. So Not too hot, which is good. But hustle and bustle of the city.
The hustle and bustle of the city. I can just imagine that actually with Martin Place. Yeah. Darrell Gland, very good, Meninda. Meninda, what were you saying was badass?
I was saying like when you were talking about your family law, and like how your mom and grandmom had to, I was like, that's pretty badass.
Badass, right? Like, oh yeah, that was her final child, my grandmother's final child, because the doctors want her, you can't have any more. I mean, I've read all of my grandmother's letters, by the way, that I can get hands on. I don't know if she'd be horrified, but I've gotten the inside story because when I was growing up, I just saw her as this really soft, kindly person, grandmother, you know, Nana, as we called her. And then I realized that she's actually a woman like that expressed herself and all her frustrations in really interesting ways. And many of the women in that part of the family as well kind of had lives that were, you know, constrained in different ways, but also had passions. And sometimes that meant that they actually sought connections with people other than their husbands. My grandmother in particular had a very fraught relationship with my grandfather, who was the part of the family that's Anglo-Indian. So that's where I get my Anglo-Indian heritage from, through the grandfather. I've stepped into work to help with a disruption from last night, so no camera. Okay, Erin, that's okay. The Doro people. Yeah, I grew up on Wajik Noongar, Buja. That is in the outer suburbs of Perth. So, Christina, you've joined us with Lucy. If you want to say where you're joining us from in the chat, you can do. Obviously, you're from
Wait, what?
the actual classroom on Gadigal country. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
you've come to us today from far away, from Sydney's west. Yeah. Just a little bit of chit chat as people join us. And in a strange way, because this heat has come from Western Australia, you know, that gives us a sense of what connects us across this vast continent. Christians joined us. That's good to see. Some people were having some issues logging on. Did anyone else have issues logging on? Doesn't seem like it. He's giving it another go. Riley's giving it another go. So I just want to make sure that we all have the chance to join in on this very warm day. Now, what we'll be doing today, you know, my little anecdotes aren't inconsequential. They encourage us to reflect on things like our origins, where we grew up, what circumstances, for example, how that informs our positionality, but also other experiences as well, not necessarily just the suburb or postcode that we grew up in, but also the relationships that we developed, you know, which also inform who we are. And I mean, I was talking a little bit about my nana and also my mum. So, you know, that just sort of came into the picture because yes, it's my birthday. Been thinking about, you know, a whole span of life really, but also mum. I live on the other side of the continent, so I don't get to see family as much as I would have liked to. But you know, we're in touch and everything. So positionality. Okay, I'm putting in the Padlet link. That's what we're going to be working on a bit more today. You might think, well, what else is there to work on? It's like when people ask you about elements of your lived experience, what do you choose? How much of it is important to you? What do you prioritize? Whether that, I mean, sometimes people use the framework of identity, right? But of course, identities are never just fixed points. They're more like a confluence of elements across time and space, to put it that way. That may include geographies, Yeah, it could even include migration experience for some of us, or being part of a generational family migration experience, or it might be different social geographies in the city that we live in and the relationships that have kind of evolved therein and senses of self. It could be about how important even family history is to us, because there are certainly people who don't necessarily feel a strong sense of a family identity for one reason or another, you know, and sometimes that can be complicated by questions of, for example, being queer, or, you know, there's no, but we cannot generalize. There are so many differentials, you know, when it comes to lived experiences and how they inform us. Then there's also educational experiences. So I think it's useful to come back to this, because when we're mapping our positionality and how it influences every stage of the research, it's a complicated thing. Not only do we have to think about what areas of our experience, identities are more salient in given contexts, but also how they bear on the research process itself. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you're all pretty smart, right? There's that. But how did you get to this point? How did you get to your work? Yeah, and what does that say about your positionality? So if you hop into the Padlet, and I'll see if I can bring it up on the screen, it's very cute and given over to sharing on the screen. Positionality and methodology. So I'm going to enlarge it because I can barely see that. Please work. All right. We can all see that all right? Yeah? Okay, so we have a few tabs here. And obviously, it's thinking positionality and methodology together. And this is for the sake of writing up those elements. If you already presented a draft a few weeks ago, you would have got some feedback, and you can find ways to reflect on that feedback. But this will also help you to think anew that reflexive process. Yeah. So just walking us through the different tabs. Okay, reflexivity is very processual. We need to be constantly involved in this sort of feedback loop. Obviously, it can create senses of uncertainty for us, of how these things interweave, but it's good to sort of isolate at least some of them and think about how they influence. So, you know, beliefs, which might also be mental representations, including self-representations, are not just abstract. They also are related to action. They guide us through the world. Yeah. They also can be a source of knowledge, sometimes encouraging us to assume certain things. Yeah. And make certain kinds of conclusions. These, in essence, are the ways in which how we're located in the world and our experiences inform the meanings we make. Yeah, including of the data that we surely have gathered, whether by surveys or interviews or other forms of analysis that we brought to bear on, you know, sources that we're working with. So there are dimensions to that that are cultural and personal. How we even select, how we determine on what basis we select data. It's not that data just, you know, in an objectivist way exists right out there and is value-free and unmediated. When, as researchers are instruments, we've got the observer effect, yeah, that when we observe, we are actually kind of changing the nature of what we're looking at, to borrow from quantum mechanics, yeah? If that's familiar to you. I brought it up before, the double slit experiment. Don't know if any of you have puzzled over that before. But even within the so-called, you know, mathematical and quantum sciences, we've got a consideration of, you know, how what we perceive of as reality is very much marked by our perceptions themselves, our apparatus. and thereby our experience. So to contemplate these things, how our beliefs influence what we observe, you can get yourself involved in reflecting anew, yeah, in relation to how to articulate your positionality and how that feeds into the research process, including your methodological framework. So that's the first consideration. And, we can actually go into breakout rooms if you like to discuss each one, but I wanted us to sort of first walk through each. So oftentimes the question of bias comes up, or partiality, especially, when it comes to the analysis of interview data and even the encounter of the interview itself. Yeah. So here we have a kind of trying to make plain how similarities and differences between researcher and interviewee can affect both the research encounter and how it proceeds, the interview encounter, as well as subsequently what meanings are made out of that data. So what do we see there? On the left, we see putatively more commonalities, and on the right, more differences and potentially awkwardness on both sides. To what degree has this been part of your experience through the interview encounter? That's something to reflect upon. So just quickly, what are the kinds of things that the women have in common in the left-hand side? And then the woman and the younger male on the right-hand side, how does that contrast? And how might that affect their encounter? And then what comes after? If you like, you can put comments in the chat. We've got one comment. Language level, and we brought this up already, haven't we? I mean, Lucy, you've contemplated that, but others have as well in the interview encounter. Same or similar gender identities. What else is salient here? Age differences or age parity generationally. Yeah. Perhaps some cultural features that align. Yeah. Thanks, Christina. And what about on the right? With that interview encounter, which seemed to be a bit more difficult. What sorts of features are being drawn upon as maybe accounting for this? Features of difference. Obviously, Erin, when you know age differences, that's at play, generational differences. But can we reflect on the second example on the right a bit, even in the chat? Age and gender can play a big role, absolutely. This is the question of proximity versus distance, isn't it? Neither are interviewing in their native language. Anything else? Yes. Similar level of English proficiency, but nuances can be lost. Well, understanding may not be the same, and there's not recourse to commonality in cultural background necessarily either. So this may or may not be similar to your own encounters. In Spanish, we also have this word which is the reverse of encounters, which is disencounters. You see how languages are so deeply conceptual that Spanish allows us to contemplate the reverse of an encounter when things aren't really aligning. disencounter. You can't say that in English, but there's just a prime example of the way in which what is your mother tongue will affect how you kind of construct things as well. All right, so looking at this tab, when we go into our groups, make some notes and conversation around whatever your experiences have been. Now, they might not align with these particular features. There might be other things. There's nothing about class here, is there? Social class or status. There may be other intervening elements. It's a good place to involve yourself in that reflexivity. Okay, and then the third tab. All right, this seeks to sort of combine the intersections between methodology, methods, and positionality. Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you feel better later. Just take some time out. That's completely fine, Alex. Yeah. All right, so we've got this circle in the middle, which suggests a feedback loop as well with the arrow. Ontology, remember how I talked about onto-epistemology? Your reality, your being in the world, and its connections to knowledge, as well as it being a basis of how you build knowledge. And so again, we've got the ontology, which is going to be the paradigm that you interpret things through, you construct meanings through. The epistemological approach also informs your methodology, yeah? And that may be drawn from some theories and concepts that you've amassed through your education, but also in this unit. Reflexivity is how do you yourself influence, has your positionality influence your research data analysis? And obviously, relatedly, positionality is directly named who am I in relation to the research. So moving from left to right, with ontology, researcher and the social world impact each other. Multiple interpretations of reality are possible, but we're always speaking from somewhere. We're always situated in one way or another. This relates to subjectivity. Within the epistemological approach, I influence my data collection and analysis. The nature of learning, of my learning, is part of my epistemology. So reflect on the relation between positionality and methodology through this lens, if you can. And the final slide is much more complicated. And in my experience, very few people have actually written anything in response to this before, but I put it up still as a dare because it's one step further. It's much more abstract maybe than what we've seen previously, but I think it's important to think about our internal processes, an internal world, which make up our subjectivity, the shifting sort of grounds of that as well, which can be deeply contextual. Obviously, we've named some axes like gender, race, class, even sexuality that can come into play. But then there's also an abundance of other kinds of structures and features that are not always understood in those sorts of ways, that may have connections to the previously named, but they could also be senses of self. Yeah, they could be more relational as well. They could be even states, interior states. Yeah, they're a bit harder to get at, but they are parts of our context and our sensibility and our capacities. So we've got power structures, we've got cultural influences, we've got inclinations towards, you know, for example, forms of feminism. We've got social discourses and silences, right? Which are actually deeply contextual as well. How have these formed us? The ability to express emotions in an intellectual environment is often frowned upon or curtailed, but the process of doing research is inevitably quite involving and can evoke different emotions for us. How is it that we kind of process through our positionality, but also our emotional life, what we're encountering in our research practice. How does that make up potentially part of our toolkit as well? So, I know a lot of us in this process have had probably points of anxiety and uncertainty. So it's good to reflect on those dimensions as well, on what we call the interior part. Yeah. So there's some fancy ways of discussing that. Sentient being, situated being, this all relates to ontology. Skilled being, sedimented being, the things that have sort of settled in us as well, that are kind of I guess the bedrock, but other things stir within this context as well. Again, social discourse and silences. The silenced parts, and that comes out of therapy, like psychotherapy, but it's very interesting to see within the research process what in us has been activated that we were previously unaware of as well. So this is just ways of talking about that. The sentient, skilled, situated, suffering, sedimented, and structured beings that we are. Yeah? How this relates to our positionality, our formative context, our skill set, and how that informs who we are as researchers with certain values. Yeah? Because we are kind of instruments deployed in the research process. This requires, of course, a nuanced interpretive frame of reference to make sense of our place in the research and in all these dimensions. Does anyone have any questions about the complexity of that diagram or what it implies? Do you think it might be useful to think through those maybe less tangible or nameable elements of our subjectivities? Anyway, it's something to think of. So I'm suggesting that we actually go into breakout rooms. Would you like to be in groups of 2, 3? Would you like to just choose? Now, it's been a while since I actually did things like breakout rooms, but they can be effective. How many of us are here now? 8. Okay. So I think I could create feasibly 4 groups. How about that? Would that be okay? So Liam, you're joining us with Sky. In which case, we'll see how this works, right?
Yeah, we'll just go together because we're all here in the room.
There's 5 of us here.
I'll just let participants choose whichever room, and I'll just open up 4 to see how that goes. Does that sound sensible?
Yeah.
Okay. So open up rooms that says, can you actually see the breakout rooms? Room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4. You might need to go down to the bottom of your screen for where there's a circle with 3 dots in it. That says more. Do you have that on your screen? Yeah, if you go in there, it should allow you to see the breakout rooms. Can you see the breakout rooms? Erin's saying no option inside. But I'm suggesting that right down the bottom of your screen, if you go right to the right-hand side, there's this circle with 3 dots in it. Don't know if that's exactly the same as what you've got. I'm just going to open the rooms. Can you see it now? Yeah? Okay, you've been invited, so please go ahead and see if you can work your way through the different tabs, yeah, to be more reflexive about your positionality and its influence on the research process so far, including in any interviews you may have done. Thank you. I'll pop in now and then. Welcome back, everyone. Can you see what I'm actually sharing? It's like a table. Actually, if Meninda is back with us right now, I'd invite you to actually put that in the chat. For some reason, it's not allowing me to do so.
Yeah, I can do.
Thank you. So we can share it with everyone. So I'm interested to see where our conversations have gone. I've had the chance to talk to people in each group, but it'd be nice to be able to share. And I guess Meninda's example here is from previous reflections on positionality as well within social research. I don't know, Meninda, if you want to talk about why this in particular was instructive to you.
Well, I basically had a whole like a whole subject about like political analysis and research methods and like the difference between all of them. It's like ontology, epistemology, qualitative, quantitative content. So this is just the table that kind of explained like how to do discourse and content analysis.
Okay.
And yeah, I found it really helpful for me because it allowed me to understand the nuance specifically in these approaches. So when it came to, data analysis, you were able to make a lot more specific like conclusions or like patterns that you could recognize versus just kind of saying like, oh yeah, all of it is meaning. Because yes, even though you have interviews or surveys, the specific type of data can be like I think most of us have like qualitative and quantitative approaches with our research. So being able to understand, okay, wait, no, hold on, this is actually what type of meaning I'm allowed to actually derive from this format is going to be very different to someone who's doing just a strictly qualitative or just a strictly quantitative type approach.
Okay, so that helps us to think through these things when we have mixed methods.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can keep talking, not just in reference to this particular table, but for you, does this kind of work as a checklist as well?
Yeah, almost. Like I definitely go through the different characteristics and have a you know, understanding of okay, how can I actually use that. So in the case of reliability or like validity, here it's about being able to, when it comes to in your report, talking about what the implications are of your data, making sure that okay, I'm mentioning how reliable this is actually going to be in the field that I'm situating my research, or in the case of validity, how accurate was my methodology and ensuring that my results are, you know, being able to be interpreted in a specific way. So I would personally encourage using it as a checklist in terms of just your report, maybe, or even when you are interpreting stuff, just having it on the side so that way you're able to kind of see, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Yeah.
For sure. Okay. It's very systematized, isn't it? So I don't know if people want to concur with, make comments on this particular table and its potential in your own reflection on your data, or if we want to talk more generally about what our conversations were in our breakout rooms. Because clearly some people have done interviews and some people have done surveys, or maybe both. Maybe at this point, since we've all got this table in the chat, which you can download, of course, if you like, we can go back to the actual Padlet to see what was most discussed. In which case, I actually have to be able to find it. Hang on. That requires actually bringing the page to the forefront. And then sharing screen again. This is definitely the hottest part of the day. I heard mention of wind. I definitely know that it's going to be working up a storm shortly, if it hasn't already where you are. All right, so let's see. Maybe people from each group or someone from each group can talk to what they most spoke about and how their conversations proceeded here. Don't all jump out at once. Of course, you can just spontaneously talk, that's fine, or you can put your hand up if you like. Because I did hear some very interesting comments about people's experience in the interviews, for example. All right, Tatiana.
Wait, yes, I think everyone can hear me. Cool. We were talking about approaching, like, when we were looking at both from a semi-structured interview, and how when you come up with some structured points or questions that you wanted to ask, you come in from a theoretical perspective, but then going into the interview, dependent on your relationship with the interviewee or your positionality, you can tailor those questions based on how the interviewee is feeling or responding to those questions. So when my family members had quite blunt answers, I would tailor the questions to be a little bit more blunt. Whereas I'd then tailor them back if family members were feeling uncomfortable by some questions.
So sort of modulating your approach,
Yeah.
following suit in terms of the tone, trying to create a middle space, a third space of your relationality there.
Yeah.
Does anyone else concur with Tatiana's experiences, or did they have different experiences? Just to flesh out a few more examples from our own reflections. You're welcome to just jump in, or you can put your hand up and then you can proceed that way. Remember, this is the space that we can share, including our anxieties around the whole experiences, if they came up, or our strategies used, wherever obstacles.
Sorry. I found that, yeah, I had to also adapt my questions depending on the person. I had a lot of questions about experiences with English as a barrier at uni or learning English when coming to Australia. But the person I interviewed yesterday made it pretty clear that he didn't have those issues in Australia because he'd lived in Canada before. So I had to pivot and ask more questions about like cultural differences or perceived differences in like his peers, because I kind of gathered that if I kept pushing the point on like English that he was going to get offended. So I had to just like be quite adaptive and sort of cut out like a whole chunk of questions because I knew that they just wouldn't work necessarily and were a bit useless and also would risk him not wanting to speak to me anymore. So yeah.
Good points. Further points to share from, it could be having engaged in interviews, or it could be, you know, other aspects of our research if we're not doing interviews that require reflexivity and kind of recalibrating even. I definitely heard some stories out there, so I know we have stuff to share, but I think it would be beneficial to share with the group. Some insights, things that you didn't expect even. I know that some of us are in an actual classroom together, and so hopefully that's enabled fluid conversation. But it'd be really lovely if you could share any of the insights that you had while talking about these things, and anything that might still be hanging around for you as well as questions. At this point, I would suggest Christina make a contribution, and perhaps even Sky. Because I know you had some interesting things going on in terms of mutual perceptions and assumptions, how they were born on the interview process, how the interview proceeded.
Okay. Okay. I
Yeah, I guess I just kind of it made me a bit more reflexive of the questions I was asking and why I chose them in the first place and how I got to that topic. But also just, I don't know, hearing about all the different experiences and it's not all the same and their processes of like getting to their jobs has been quite different. Some found no issue at all with the way the current structure is set up. Others found it like pointed out the hypocrisy of which immigrants we discriminate against and which ones we don't. But yeah, it has pushed me to kind of reevaluate my original positionality statement and now probably shift it a little bit to incorporate what my experience has been interviewing others.
Yeah, good. That sort of reivindicates why we're turning to positionality again right now at this point, doesn't it? Because at every point we're pushed, sometimes uncomfortably, to the reflexivity loop. And whilst that can create effects of uncertainty and a bit deeper probing into ourselves, not into the interview process itself. Having said that, if you are still doing further interviews, that may also affect then how you approach a further interview, right? From previous experiences. Anyone else wish to contribute on that matter? If you're yet to do interviews, it's something to bear in mind, given the experiences of your peers here today as well. Liam, did you have anything to offer?
No, not really. Yeah.
What kind of bearing might reflexivity have for the actual approach you're using and the data you're looking at?
You don't actually.
I suppose I just got to be like hyper aware of like what articles I'm choosing. I'm like trying really hard to get a broad scope of articles, but it's kind of hard, especially like because like subscriptions and stuff to
Oh,
newspapers,
yeah.
which was always difficult. But also like there's not always a deep archive. Like for some reason, most newspapers don't. Most newspapers they don't really publish their articles past like I don't know.
A certain day.
Yeah, like 2014 or something like that. So it's been difficult to find ones for the 2000s, but yeah, it's just you're just being like hyper aware of just your position within it. Yeah.
And your process of selection.
Yeah, that's the main thing. It's been pretty difficult to come up with like a really like regimented way to find these articles.
Here's something. Have you tried Factiva?
Sorry?
Have you tried using Factiva, the media search engine?
I haven't, no. Yeah, I've just been like on like because with the uni you can get like subscription through like Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. So I've been using them, the Guardian and ABC as well.
I appreciate the time limit there because some of the archived articles will be only on microfiche rather than electronically retained.
Yeah.
Which obviously involves more of a deep dive in terms of sourcing the microfiches in the library, being able to spend time there doing the archival work. It's not as quick as when you're using digital sources. So there's some things to think about in terms of how you constructed your corpus, so to speak. But maybe as well, looking at Meninda's table can help you to think about those dimensions that inform discourse analysis, given that she spoke that this was specifically around discourse analysis and content analysis. So that might be useful to you.
Yeah.
What you think, Liam, but just a suggestion. Christina, tell us about your encounter with Michael Muhammad from Sweatshop.
Sorry, my encounter with
Michael Muhammad. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Michael was very insightful and interesting character. I think he definitely challenged the way that I thought, and I liked how blunt he was with telling me if I was assuming things, if I was wrong, and then also providing theory behind different concepts that he was bringing up. So it was probably the most challenging interview I've done, but it was interesting as well.
So how does that, you said the most challenging interview you've done, how does that contrast to the other interviews and what made that difference?
So the other interviews I did a focus group with my friends, and that was just super chill. We all know each other, so it felt like a conversation, and I didn't have my guard up. And I feel like I know them quite well as well, so there wasn't anything that we would say that would like offend each other or anything like that. And then I did a over email interview with someone from Honey Soy. So that was also super chill because it's not in person. It's just like a Q&A. Whereas with Michael, he like knows his stuff pretty well. He has the strong opinions as well. And also founded Sweatshop. So he's quite a status.
Yeah, he's a figure. I mean,
Yeah.
he's large. So, was that person like face to face?
It was via Zoom with Michael.
Okay, so there was still visual elements and body language and tone and all that kind of stuff that would have come across.
Yeah.
Had he seen any of the questions beforehand, or was it right just off the cuff that you were asking questions?
Yeah, it was just right off the cuff. I didn't show him any questions, and I actually like when I was interviewing him, he ended up answering a lot of the questions without me asking, anyways. So I had to kind of adjust and just come up with other questions to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, that's not uncommon, particularly if it really sits in the pocket of the person that you're interacting with and they've turned over these things and they've thought about them, they've questioned them. Did you find any parity between what came up in the focus group and also what he kind of conceptualized and challenged you on? Given that one context was very agreeable and amiable amongst friends, and the other one was more kind of cold calling.
I think maybe because my friends haven't really thought about it to a deeper extent, they would bring things up that if you looked into it, it would make sense for why they were bringing it up. Like, trying to think of examples. I think one thing is my friend kind of identified that people in Western Sydney might take up this prestige of having this accent or being from that area so that they can tell other people, oh, well, I came from an underprivileged area. So, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but like a sense of identity, I guess. And then, yeah. And then he would bring that up as it was a way of people kind of getting together and I guess moving beyond the stigma. And then yeah, things like that. And then also my friends would mention stabbings and eshays, and then to me that was an internalized stigma that was making the perception of Western Sydney even worse, but to Michael it was self-determination. Yeah.
Very interesting points. Between the sort of reference points, they're also mediatized about geography, discourses about risk, safety, marginality, and then a different turn around self-determination. So, but it could still be on some kind of scale, right? Continuum of how people position themselves relative to certain discourses.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting for you to think about your own kind of changing positionality in light of that, but also what will be analytically useful. Yeah. Because obviously when we're confronted about our consumptions, that's a term of the 19th century, when we're confronted about our assumptions, it can be quite disorienting.
Mm.
Oh, I'm really off base, right?
Mm.
But instead, it just requires us to go back to that reflexive loop that we saw in the first tab.
Yeah.
And it can actually be another way of learning. Yeah. And
Yeah.
reworking a little bit.
Yeah.
Very dynamic process between
That's,
the empirical, yeah, and the primary
yeah.
data we get from those sorts of encounters or even surveys.
Mm.
And at this point, since you provided us, thank you, Christina, since you provided us with a table, would you like to reflect a little bit on your use of the survey? And I don't know how much you've been able to recruit yet, but
In like regarding surveys and what
yeah, because not everyone here is doing surveys.
but wait, what is this? Sorry, like in regards to
The choice of the survey and if you have recruited yet
Mm,
the survey, if anything has come up that
yeah.
wasn't expected.
Yeah, I've been able to do like a couple with my survey, but I'm trying to not enough for me to
Not to draw conclusions yet.
yeah. But the thing is as well, because I'm familiar with these people, like the people within my circle, this was actually something I kind of forgot to mention in my presentation, but I'm not entirely sure what the role of like proximity to respondents has on the way that they respond, right? Like, for example, it's really convenient for me to say to some of my close friends, or like just fill out the survey,
Yeah.
and letting them know that I'm doing a research project on it. But then also like with people, like the recruitment process being like, can you share this around to your friends who may not know me directly, but just tell them that it's like safe and I'm not gonna, it's supposed to be relatively secure in the way that responses are going about. But yeah, I'm trying to understand how that
My influence.
yeah, how that may or may not influence the way that they see it, whether or not they take it with, a lot of legitimacy, or if they think it's just like, oh, this is a passion project that my friend is doing, versus like, oh no, they're like trying to do serious field work. I think the construction of what they believe research to be is also something that might impact it. Whether or not that impacts it hugely, I don't really know. But it's definitely something I've been mindful of, where because there's a huge coming from a science background, like I started off with my degree like all through high school, and then even like the first couple of years of uni, I was doing science, like immunobiology and like microbiology and everything. And it's really changed, it's really formed the way that I view political like research, and the way that I view how legitimate research is kind of, constructed, or even
Mm.
science communication, and same thing with political communication. So yeah, I'm trying not to be too harsh on myself regarding like the validity, for example, of my research, and like, okay, are you really making a meaningful, I guess, conclusion from data that may or may not only be limited to, the individuals that you know. So yeah, but I'm trying to justify that with like, look, realistically, this isn't like a state-funded project that's going to be able to recruit like all the citizens of Australia. So it is what it is.
And specifically sick
Mm.
populations.
Yeah, that too.
So I was thinking as you were speaking that you could think about, well, obviously some of the sampling is convenient, some of it's snowball, that you could
Yeah.
think about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. So we're talking about buy-in to the research and the conduction of the survey, aren't we? So those that are much more within your convenience sample, with whom you already have connections, may be more persuaded, yes, because of your passions, yes, because they're friends of yours. That's more intrinsic because it's within the circle. And extrinsic might be precisely for the very reasons that these become more salient matters for people in their lives.
Yeah.
So that will mean that they're more inclined, given that extrinsic motivation, to participate in the survey.
Yeah.
So that might help to kind of balance off what we're
Yeah.
taking as a possible, factor of proximity and distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously it's time sensitive and one can only recruit in, those forms of sampling so far. And again, you spoke to the fact that you cannot have a really large N because it's not something that's got a big time scale and population scale.
Yeah.
But that might help to frame a little bit then how you balance off questions of validity and so on.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing with any, that's a research effect, isn't it? Because what we're doing is creating something.
Yeah.
It's a secondary artifact of our own deliberations and our own engagements through our research instruments. So whilst we want validity and we want all the things that we speak about as being approximate to some kind of more scientific approach, at the same time, there's going to be dimensions that intervene there that make it hard for us to be able to generalize, even when we're using a kind of downscaled quant method like a survey.
Yeah.
So that's something for you to think about in terms of how you articulate your positionality, your relations with the population, and then what was gathered in the data, what might have motivated people to participate. It is really a co-creation, regardless of whether it's quant or qual. Some people are just more inclined to be involved. And as I said yesterday, women tend to respond more to research than men. Thanks, Melinda. Does anyone have any further points to raise that might be connected to those issues in what they've managed to do so far, or even what they're struggling with? Claire, would you like to talk a little bit about your experiences?
About like what I'm struggling with?
Or what has kind of evolved in the interview space? Either of them. Or both.
I'm trying to think. I think for me, one thing I'm interviewing people like I know already, and some of them I'm very close to, and others like I know through work, but I've known them for like a year, if not longer. And I think I told them up front that like I wouldn't bring up anything I knew about them into the interview. So like if they wanted to disclose something, that was entirely up to them. Like I wouldn't suggest things, which I think is good in terms of like getting them to like do the interview. But I also think it's got limitations because people confide things to you as a friend, but then they don't necessarily mention it in an interview.
That's true. Blurred lines, yeah.
Yeah, which I think will be interesting as I do like some like more stuff like towards the end and like reflect on it, because I'm sure there's literature about interviewing friends, which I could mention.
Yeah, you will be able to draw on that. I had a very interesting experience that wasn't so much because I was friends with the participants, but instead, I mean, not as a researcher, but I had a PhD student who recruited from amongst people I knew. And so when we looked at their responses, it was really hard for me as supervisor not to lean in on my own personal knowledge about why they might be making those sorts of statements, because it wasn't even my research. And yet at the same time, I kind of felt like how much of what informs how we approach our data, whether we're the chief researcher or just someone that's supervising someone else's work, that sits outside of the interviews, will then inform how we approach that data. Do you know what I mean? So it requires us to think about our positionality directly or indirectly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like one of my friends I interviewed, she's Nepalese, and she constantly references other Nepalese people. I know some of them through work as well, but she'll say like they don't want to be friends with Australians, like they want to keep to themselves. But in her interview, she said, "No, I think people who are Nepalese want to be friends with Australians." And I was like, "That's not what you've told me, but that's what you're saying on record."
The interview effect and
Yeah.
what's used within expectations and norms around what one can say or not. So that's pretty insightful. there is a kind of whole branch of thinking about people's enunciations or enunciative statements, yeah. It's not so much discourse analysis, but it's more like what when I talked about positioning before, just you're in your group, how people imagine their place in the world and how they project certain, frames, like ideological or whatever, that may not be on the basis of lived experience or may help to condition some of the difficult encounters they've had, including if they've been discriminated against or whatever, and they may sound contradictory. Yeah. But when they make reference to others, there's this whole tradition that comes out of social psychology, which is called dialogical self theory. I've used a little bit of that and looking at the way in which people reference others in the community. And it's known as the third position. So the way people involve themselves in self-talk about their world and themselves, yeah, can sometimes make reference to their relations with others, but it can be constitutive of how they see themselves as well. So they position themselves in relation to a third. Now that third could be a person, it could be an authority, it could be any number of things, but it actually structures, it's kind of like how they identify, how they disidentify as well. So if that's of import to you, because that field of social psychology understands the self as inherently dialogical. And so within a research encounter, that is also being set up with you because they're dialoguing with you in a new situation, which is not the friendship circle, but instead as a researcher on a topic. Yeah, so they might make recourse or reposition themselves in certain ways by using a third. In this case, it's a revalorized one. Yes, Nepalese wish to make friends. Yeah. So how does that play out? Is that saying more about themselves?
I think it's definitely about her because, like, for me, like, I'm one of her best friends, and a lot of the other, like, Australians, like Anglo-Australians at work, she's also very friendly with them, unlike the other Nepalese people. They're not mean to, like, the white Australian people, but there's not the same level of closeness. And she definitely knows that, but I think in the interview, she was definitely, like, projecting how she perceives, like, Australians, not how she critically perceives Nepalese people. Makes sense?
Okay, so that might have been a minor note, but it was still shaping what she was saying in dialogue. Yeah. So this might be a good sort of segue, if you're willing, Barry, to talk about your own interviews and some of the differences amongst the cohort of people that you involved in interviews.
Yeah. So I was interviewing 3 people, and they're all from different sectors. So one was a healthcare worker, one was worked with like the health department for the government, so they were a cross-cultural worker, and then one I think worked for a community organization. So I had to kind of like tailor my questions because they weren't always like relevant to the different people due to their professions. And I think like the way I structured it as like a semi-structured interview, I left the questions open-ended and sort of let them guide the conversation. And at the end, I kind of like asked if there was like other things they wanted to discuss. And like all 3 times they brought up things that they wanted to sort of expand on. And so we would talk for like another 10 minutes about that stuff. And it was like, yeah, stuff that they were interested in or things that they thought were really important for me to consider in my research. So yeah, I think it was just important for me to sort of let them guide it and not let my own bias and assumptions come in as much as possible.
Very good. And so I guess all of these experiences we've spoken to today and the questions that have come up for ourselves can also make us think about then how we go ahead and approach this data, right? The different experiences people have related and the way in which that shifted maybe their thinking, or some of the limitations even of what they initially started out with, will be, I think, productive ground for this reflexive process to then feed that into the nature of your analysis and how you explain your methodology as well. Yeah, so methodology is that guiding spirit, as we saw already earlier in semester, which is informed by theoretical propositions, but also different kinds of areas of the onto-epistemological that are in our environment, that are in our worlds, and that make up also part of our positionality. That's the relationship right there. And so that's why we've revisited this notion of how to articulate our methodological choices, their effects as well on shaping the data, as well as how positionality inflects that. Remember last year I said infects instead of inflects, and that wasn't actually my intention, but it did sort of create a viral sense, you know, that there's kind of an uptake of ourselves and our assumptions, and also how we are perceived within interview encounters in particular. And so we really do need to take that measured approach, indeed, when we come to analysing the data itself. So I hope that today's session, in spite of the rush forward as we go forward in the next couple of weeks writing up, has been useful. I don't know. Do you think it's been useful? Yeah. It's okay to have that epistemological uncertainty. That's part of the process of epistemological vigilance that's required in the very messy and diverse social experiences that we've been seeking to capture, as well as engage with in the work we're doing. Yeah. So we can sign off for today and see each other probably, most likely, in person, because I don't think that the Pilbara is going to be sending over a heat wave next week. In fact, I believe that there's even going to be a 15-degree day coming up. So we're in for some changeability, aren't we? Even the weather is unpredictable, just like the social world. So yeah, enjoy your afternoons anyway, and stay well. Yeah, keep away from the windy weather, and look after yourselves. Thanks for coming along today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now.